Future Warrior, Earth's Children. Chapter 14. Vice Admiral Yoshiro Matsuda stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser UES Aquarius and watched the twisted mass of wreckage as it swirled in the darkness. The vast debris field occasionally lit up with the flash of internal detonations. The hulk at the center marked the grave of hundreds of UEF personnel that had been aboard the City-class cruiser UES Moscow. This had been their 9th raid, and each had been more costly than the next, but Task Force 33 remained in the fight. Through his 3DSi display, Matsuda saw an initial report from Tactical on the action appear via an icon, but he filed it without comment. He had seen what had happened. The Moscow had been moving to achieve a firing solution when she had taken a critical hit, possibly from some type of low observable mine. The concealed weapon had targeted the ship's engines. The hit left the Moscow dead in the water and vulnerable, and one of the 4 defending frigate-class Deimos vessels had rammed her, the action destroying both vessels. The action had not lasted long after that, as the remaining 3 enemy vessels and the replenishment depot they had been defending in the system were annihilated by the task force's cruisers and battlecruisers at long range. Matsuda frowned. His small force was slowly being whittled down and had dropped from the initial 16 ships to now only 10 remaining. The UES Moscow had been the first complete loss, but the combination of a growing number of seriously wounded personnel requiring advanced medical care and battle damage had forced him to send the fleet's dedicated medical ship, the cruiser Arctic, back to friendly space. She would be joined by the battle-scarred cruiser Hestia, which was towing the disabled island-class destroyer UES Sardinia. The small fleet would be escorted by the UES Gemini. The Astrology-class battlecruiser had been patched up in the field and remained functional, but required access to a dry dock to repair her long list of battle damage and cascading technical faults in her subsystems. The tally of damage Task Force 33 had inflicted on the enemy must have been crippling. Dozens of minor warships destroyed, and 9 critical ship repair or resupply installations have been committed to the deep. These were losses the much-diminished Deimos fleet could not sustain and had little or no chance of replacing. Despite successfully following both the letter and intent of his orders, Matsuda frowned inwardly. He trusted his instincts and those of his crew. They were missing something. Something was wrong. The Deimos were acting too dumb, and they had completely failed to attempt to hunt Task Force 33 down. The Deimos ship movements made no tactical sense. That meant that they had either forgotten the art of war, or their movements were part of a larger stratagem that he could not yet discern. The concerns raised by his navigational staff officer, Janet Combs, had stuck in his mind like a thorn. He had passed the data and his personal concerns along to Stratcom and High Admiral Torville. The absence of the Deimos' remaining capital ships had prompted Matsuda to include in the message that he would pause after the latest attack and await further orders. He would not advance deeper into Deimos-held space until he knew what was going on, or he had clear orders to do so. 12 hours later, Matsuda had just re-emerged onto the spacious bridge of the UES Aquarius, rested, with a cup of coffee in hand, when the on-duty communications officer broke the near silence, his voice cutting through the low background murmurs of quiet conversation. "Admiral, priority message traffic. Your eyes only." Matsuda immediately turned to his console and accessed the message. As his eyes flew over the content of the communication, Matsuda swore, the bridge officers and crew looking up in surprise. The Vice Admiral having never before, even in the heat of combat, having used profanity. "TSO, give the emergency recall order, all ships to prepare for priority orders and imminent transit out of the system." As the tactical staff officer and bridge crew broke into a surge of activity, Matsuda reread the message. The message was an urgent recall from Stratcom. He was ordered with all haste to make all possible speed for the Wolf 359 system. Intelligence analysis of Deimos movements had determined a high likelihood that the Deimos were amassing their remaining heavy units to attack the system, which was serving as a coordinated logistics and resupply point for advanced UEDF forces. The analysis further determined that Deimos vessels had highly likely dispersed widely across the galactic volume to infiltrate UEDF lines individually or in small numbers, and that they were now concentrating deep inside space, previously deemed safe. Oracle, the long-range space surveillance network that had been established since the Deimos attack against Earth, had been designed to track enemy movements and provide ample warning of any further attempt to attack Earth. The system had not been designed to detect single enemy ships, and the Oracle system's network of tracking stations was concentrated closer to Earth. This had left gaps in the coverage in outer systems, and it had been unable to discern the possible objective of the Deimos movements until it was too late. Attached to the message from Stratcom was a note from High Admiral Torville, which read, "Well, Yoshi, it seems the enemy still has some life left in it. You and your Janet Combs are to be commended, but there will be time for all that later. The Deimos have caught us napping, and it will be some time before additional heavy fleet units can reach Wolf 359. Despite your position behind enemy lines, Task Force 33 represents the closest large relief force to the system. Wolf 359 is vital. If it is lost, our operations will be heavily degraded. This might be a last cast of the dice, but remember, Yoshi, an animal is most dangerous when it is desperate and cornered. Godspeed to you, and to all the men and women of Task Force 33. Matsuda looked up. Silence had descended on the bridge, and all eyes were on him, expectation and determination showing in the faces. All ships report ready, sir. Matsuda nodded to Janet Combs, who had spoken from a navigational staff officer console. Take us to the Wolf 359 system, Janet. Best possible speed, please. Stalker was by Zoe's side when Lee Waters and Link walked in. Both were in their EEA and had weapons slung. Behind them through the doorway, Stalker could see a Pathfinder glance curiously in their direction. Stalker stood. Their body language alone told him something was up. "Boss," said Link, his voice sounding slightly uncertain. "Something is happening. Scratch units of all the assault divisions present on Earth have been given orders to prepare for urgent deployment. That includes all available Strider units, including the 2nd INCA Wing." As Stalker went to speak, Link held up a hand. "Boss, given everything that has happened," Link glancing at Zoe, "and what you have been through, no one expects you to go. You have only just completed the Strider conversion course." For a moment, Stalker felt a rush of warring emotions, confusion, doubt, uncertainty, hesitation. But they passed in the blink of an eye, replaced by solid surety. "No, she would never forgive me if I stayed. Duty first in all things, Link. What do we know?" Link nodded, accepting the answer. "Not a lot, boss. The 2nd Wing is already being uplifted to orbit. You can meet them easily enough. Rumors say Wolf 359. Stalker blinked. "You're joking, right?" Link grimaced, afraid not. Stalker swore. "That's far beyond the front line. If there's a threat to the system, someone is cocked up badly." Lee Waters spoke up, his gravelly, deep voice. "It's the linchpin of our entire rest, resupply, and logistics effort for the campaign. That's why it is where it is, minimal risk." Waters took a half step forward. "Stalker, you sure that you're up for this? No one would think less of you for sitting this one out." Stalker forced a smile. "Lee, trust me on this. There has never been a time when I've been more prepared to bring death to all." Stalker turned and took Zoe's hand. The isolation capsule having been removed 2 days prior. She remained in an induced coma and still looked deathly pale. Giving her hand a squeeze, he gently kissed her on the forehead, and then turned and strode out into the hallway. Close to the door, 4 heavily armed and armored Pathfinders were close by, and Stalker could see another pair at the end of the hallway. Stalker turned to the closest one of the Pathfinders. He wore no insignia, but Stalker guessed that he was the unit commander. "Duty calls. I'm leaving her in your care. Please keep her safe." Stalker had begun to turn away when the Pathfinder reached out and gripped Stalker's forearm in a warrior's greeting, Stalker returning the grip on instinct. The Pathfinder's expression was impossible to discern behind his helmet, but his voice when he spoke was low and steady. "We have her, battle commander. She will be safe, you may depend on it. Transport is inbound to return you to the 2nd INCA Wing in orbit, 5 minutes out. Shuttle pad on the roof. Good hunting." Stalker blinked. Of course they were listening. He tightened his grip in acknowledgement, nodded, and then released his grip and walked away. Built for patrol, escort, and counter-piracy duties, the UES Mantis was not a large vessel by United Earth Fleet standards. A Hunter-class frigate, she was 200 meters long and had a crew of only 55. Her primary armament was a bank of medium-range plasma cannons, but she also carried a limited longer-range punch in the form of HOTS. The heavyweight orbital torpedoes were carried in a single 8-round launcher. She also lacked the UMEC Marine or fighter detachments commonly embarked on larger vessels. Right now, a lack of firepower was the last thing on the mind of the Mantis's captain. The Mantis had been on patrol on the edge of the Wolf 359 system for 2 weeks. In that time, nothing of note had occurred. The time had been largely spent watching ships come and go from the system and trying to catch up on the latest developments occurring at the distant battlefront. Wolf 359 was deep within UEDF-held space, and ever since the Battle of Maiden Port, the Deimos threat in space had been vastly diminished. Only at the Mantis's communications console was there anything approaching tension or concern. In the last 24 hours, there had been a near total degradation of the long-range communications network. The failure had started with a few breaks in the system, relay satellites failing, a not unusual occurrence. Any number of things could cause a temporary network failure. A hardware fault on a satellite, solar flare, or a glitch in encryption algorithms. Nevertheless, in the last 12 hours, the initial intermittent and isolated failures had cascaded into a total system blackout. The operator was still frowning over the lack of a response to his test signals when from the nearby tactical console, he heard the operator call out, "Sir, I have contacts inbound. Ships just exited faster than light at the outer perimeter." The voice of the tactical operator sounded flat and bored, which was unsurprising since several ships had translated into system since the communications malfunctions without prior warning. Nevertheless, the communications operator felt a surge of concern, and he turned to the nearby navigation console operator. "Was this on the schedule?" After a moment, the reply came, "No, nothing's due in or out in the next 8 hours." Concern growing, the communications operators scanned his console. "They have not transmitted a code clearance, and I am not picking up any UEF navigation beacons." The navigation console operator shrugged her shoulders and leant back in her chair. "That does not make any sense. How many contacts are there?" The voice of the tactical console operator, when it came, was soft and strained. 34 contacts now. More coming in." The communications operator slammed his hand on the ship emergency button. "All hands to action stations. This is not a drill. Captain to the bridge." Even as the Mantis fired up her weapons suite and began to come about, the growing fleet of Deimos ships began their high-speed charge into the system. Winded, the captain of the Mantis stormed onto the bridge and wordlessly took in the tactical display. After a moment, she barked out, "Tactical report. Ma'am, Deimos fleet, they have commenced jamming, but I can confirm at least 8 capital ships, maybe a dozen cruisers, plus a lot of smaller vessels." She spun on her heels. "Understood. Communications, have you warned System Command?" "Negative, ma'am. Long-range communications are down, and jamming is interfering with point-to-point communications. Recommend we dispatch a high-speed comms drone with a data packet." "Make it so. Navigation. Plot me an oblique intercept course. I don't want to meet them head-on." When after a moment she had heard no reply, the captain turned. "Did you hear my order?" The navigation console operator appeared lost for words and was frozen, her hands hovering over her display. The captain's voice dropped its hard edge and softened. "Ensign, we cannot outrun them. Running will only delay the inevitable. That leaves fighting as our only recourse, and I don't intend to go down with my back towards the enemy. If you cannot carry out my orders, please step away from your console, and I will give your duties to another." Swallowing, the ensign managed a "Yes, ma'am," bringing us about on an oblique intercept course. The captain turned back to the forward display, speaking in short clipped tones. "Tactical analysis? We'll never get in range for the plasma battery, ma'am. Our best chance is getting as close as we can and using our torpedoes, but even at maximum range we will still be well within the threat envelope before we can fire." The captain nodded. "Understood. My thoughts exactly. Let's hope the ship's defensive suite and luck are enough." As the Mantis closed the onrushing Deimos, she was initially ignored. However, soon long-range missiles and energy fire began to arc out towards her. The small ship maneuvered violently, and her point defenses began to knock down the incoming missiles, but they could do nothing about the Deimos energy fire, one of the massive rounds clipping the Mantis and causing her to begin to slowly tumble end over end. Even as she tumbled out of control, brief flashes lit her profile in the darkness as her 8 heavyweight torpedoes were launched and sped towards the enemy. Moments after the last torpedo launched, another Deimos energy round caught the small vessel amidships and tore her in two in a cloud of debris. The 8 advanced torpedoes maneuvered in randomized patterns of course, direction, and speed, and emitted a combination of high-power electronic jamming and laser-dazzling beams to confuse weapons and sensors trying to track them. 3 of the 8 weapons reached their target, a Deimos cruiser, and slammed home, their massive ship-killing warheads wreaking terrible havoc. The Deimos cruiser hauling out of formation as her structural integrity failed, and she began to come apart in a cloud of debris. Ahead of the Deimos fleet, a small, fast drone blazed, its high-powered onboard communications systems striving to burn through the electronic interference. The Battle of Wolf 359 had begun. As the Deimos fleet flowed into the system, it split into 4 elements. The largest force, with all of the heavy capital ships, headed straight in system, aiming like a dagger at the expansive network of UEDF fleet repair and logistics facilities and the concentration of ships of all types that hovered in and around them. 2 other elements, each led by a handful of cruisers spread out, one aiming at flanking wide and cutting off any avenue of retreat, and another aimed at the system's sole planet and its cluster of orbital facilities. The last smaller force lingered on the edge of the system, prowling to ambush any arriving UEDF reinforcements. Given some warning by the communications drone deployed by the Mantis, the UEF elements and system were beginning to react, but it was haphazard and impeded by the mass of merchant and resupply vessels in orbit in and around the facilities. Most of the UEF warships in the system were present for badly needed repairs and resupply, with ammunition low and systems already out of action due to battle damage. As the logistics hub for the campaign against the Deimos, scores of merchant and resupply vessels were mid-process of loading and unloading cargo, leaving the few warships not in dock for repair, without clear fields of fire and unable to target the onrushing Deimos ships. As the Deimos main fleet approached the system's few outer orbital defenses began to engage the enemy, space filling with the flashes of missiles and projectiles of all types. On board the docked cruiser UES Philadelphia, a running, able seaman stumbled and fell as the deck shook beneath him. As he scrambled, trying to regain his feet, a red armored hand reached down and dragged him to his feet. He looked up into the biggest man he had ever seen. The man's blunt face and gruff features were punctuated by hard brown eyes and intricate tattoos just visible at his neck. The man was dressed in blood-red, colored extreme environment armor, the EEA being covered in stylized scenes of battle etched into the suit's ceramic composite plates, while starting at the shoulder and running down the arms to each armored fist was a delicate, flowing golden script. "Thank you, Specialist," the sailor blurted, catching his breath. Assault Commander Kalen of the Barbarians Assault Division, 1st Regiment, nodded. "Stand tall on the quarterdeck, son. All of us." He turned and looked out of the bridge viewing port. Long-range Deimos fire was beginning to tear chunks off the repair station, rounds also impacting the Philadelphia as she locked in dock, most of her systems powered down or dismantled for maintenance. "Specialist, the captain has given orders to abandon ship. We need to go, or we'll all die here." Kalen turned to look down at the young sailor before snapping on his EEA's helmet with a click. "Dying is what we do, boy. The trick is to take a few of these bastards with you first." What's the nearest operational ship still in dock? The sailor paused as a squad of barbarian assault troops came jogging up, bristling with weaponry. The destroyer Aleutian. She is docked for resupply. She is in the process of powering up. Dock 12. Kalen nodded. Take me there. The Commodore in charge of Naval Station Wolf 359 watched grimly from the communication station on the Central Space Dock. His small command was being torn apart. As soon as word of the threat had come in from Amantis, he had tried to send out a distress signal through the jamming and scrambled his system security force. Centered on the cruiser UES Dublin, he also had 3 destroyers, the Malta, Apache, and Tuareg, as well as a single remaining frigate, the Cheetah. Without hesitation, the tiny force had formed up on the system perimeter alongside the outer orbital defense platforms and bravely engaged the onrushing Deimos center force, numbering over 20 ships, almost all considerably heavier and more powerful. They could do nothing about the 2 Deimos flanking forces, but that could not be helped. The result was never in doubt, but as the Dublin and her escorts died, they purchased precious minutes with their lives. They had forced the Deimos vessels of the main center force to slow and maneuver to evade the mass of heavyweight torpedoes and weapons fire that had been thrown at them by the UEDF defense. This had allowed the ships docked for resupply and maintenance time to power up and hastily deploy for action. As he watched, he could see the damaged battlecruiser Gemini, a recent arrival, form up alongside the battleship Neptune and the bird of prey class assault carrier UES Eagle. The Eagle and Neptune had been in port for resupply and were being joined by a collection of other smaller ships that had been in for repair or resupply, including 3 cruisers, the Arctic, Hestia, and Adelaide. There were also 6 destroyers, the Leyte, Aleutian, Tahiti, Huron, Mohican, and Thracian. As he watched the large botanical-class supply ship UES Pertia also formed up, her captain having decided that she would rather fight than run. It was a pitifully small force against what was coming, but it was all they had. His command lost, the Commodore could do little but watch, his role, now, confined to being a spectator. The action was now in the hands of the commanding admiral on the Eagle and the captains of the remaining ships and system. On board the assault carrier UES Eagle, the admiral stood impassively amongst the chaos of her combat direction center. The CDC was packed with dozens of officers and staff, all seemingly talking at once, as they struggled to organize a coherent defense and get every aircraft and weapon system on the Eagle operational. Ignoring the scene around her, she cast her cold blue eyes over the main tactical display and its external camera feeds. The Gemini and Neptune were maneuvering to use their armored bulks and formidable shields and close-in defenses to screen the more fragile orbital facilities, presenting their larger broadside profiles towards the enemy main force. Eagle had also done the same, the line of broadside ships appearing like a naval gun line of a long-gone age. Normally, she would have preferred to keep her assault carrier pointing at the enemy and moving to offer a smaller, more fleeting target. But this battle was not one of maneuver. They were outnumbered and surrounded, and she could not abandon the ships and people stuck on the multiple repair platforms. As she watched the mass of merchant ships began to follow her order to scatter. They were considerably more numerous than the enemy, and running was their only option, an option she and the warships of the UEDF could not and would not take. A career in the Navy had led her to this point, and drawing on her experience, she knew at a glance that for the defending ships that victory was not an objective. There was no victory here. As the Deimos fleet elements drew closer, more and more fighters poured from the Eagle into the rapidly developing fight, a growing maelstrom of fire. Soon ships would begin to die. She looked calmly around, her face statuesque, satisfied and proud that everyone was doing their duty. They would all die here. All that was left now was to die well. Assault Commander Kalen snarled in fury, and raising his ASBR-103 cut down the first Deimos warrior entering through the shattered bridge doors, his fire joined a moment later by that of his accompanying regimental staff unit. The following Deimos came on at a rush, trying to storm the bridge and suppress the defending assault troops. It was an effort doomed to fail. Kalen slammed in a fresh magazine. The broken doorway jammed with Deimos bodies. Let them know your fury. Kill them all. No mercy. Even as the firing died away, Kalen could hear cries of "No mercy, no mercy, no mercy," echoing from beyond the bridge doors, and the sound of torrents of ASBR impulse fire. On his Blue Force tracker in his helmet's heads-up display, Kalen saw that the Barbarians' tent company had counterattacked to push the Deimos clear of the bridge. Even as he examined the tactical situation, the ship shook, the fast-maneuvering destroyer UES Aleutian taking glancing energy fire, the deck tremoring under Kalen's feet. The unfortunate Deimos boarding force had not expected to encounter over 200 elite and heavily armed and armored assault troops on board the Aleutian, and they were being hunted down and annihilated. Kalen cursed viciously as the comm net again broke down and his ears momentarily filled with static. Stationed at the main orbital dock, Kalen had given orders for his 1st Regiment to join with and reinforce any UEF vessels they could reach, while other Barbarian Division's elements remained spread across the system's orbital stations or on the surface of Locutus, the system's sole planet. The captain and command crew of the Aleutian had largely ignored the battle on their bridge, so focused were they on the fast-moving naval fight. Even as Kalen glanced out of the bridge's main view screen, he caught a glimpse of fighters flashing by, moving so fast he could not tell if they were friend or foe. The space was filled with uncountable pieces of unrecognizable debris spiraling in the void. The Aleutian was turning hard, ducking under what looked like the shattered hull of a much larger ship, all the while seeking and engaging targets of opportunity and desperately trying to stay alive. The UEF's stubborn refusal to die had forced the Deimos to come in close, and true to form, they had begun to conduct boarding operations, and in so doing had run straight into the Barbarians' Assault Division and UEMC Marine detachments. The anger of the Barbarians was palpable, and they had fought with a burning fury, falling upon any Deimos who managed to succeed with the boarding attempts. As Kalen watched, the Aleutian emerged from cover and fired off a salvo of heavyweight torpedoes, the HOTS blazing away before violently dodging a hail of return fire. It wasn't a game she could play forever, but it was the only card she had to play. Kalen paused as a report came in from 10th Company's battle commander. The Deimos boarding effort had been eliminated. It was welcome news, but the remaining UEDF defenders were on borrowed time, and Kalen knew it. They needed help, and they needed it now. On the edge of the Wolf 359 system, a series of rippling flashes lit up the void. Even as the ships of Task Force 33 exited faster than light speed, their weapons were already firing, pulse and rail cannons lighting up the surrounding space. On board the UES Aquarius, Janet Combs felt disorientated. The past days had passed in an unbroken blur of rapid high-speed runs and FTL jumps. She could feel every one of the hours of mental and emotional fatigue accrued by the long hours at her station. But adrenaline and a cocktail of stimulants was working hard to burn through the fog in her mind. Even as the deck shook under her feet, the bridge crew and staff officers worked frantically, a chorus of voices all talking at once. Contacts, hot approach. Debris field dead ahead. Adjusting. Keep us clear. Watch the Taurus. Keep her close. Keep our drift within the lane. Amongst the carefully choreographed chaos, Janet looked over to where Vice Admiral Matsuda stood motionless, his hands behind his back, his uniform pristine, a picture of calm. As she looked, he tilted his head slightly at her in acknowledgement and winked. At that moment, the bridge screens dimmed as the massively powerful forward battery of the UES Aquarius lit up space. The volley, coordinated with a salvo from the accompanying battlecruiser, UES Taurus, slammed into the distant silhouette of a Deimos warship. The cruiser-size vessel's spine broke, and amongst a cloud of debris, the two halves of the ship separated, spiraling into the void on their slow journey to the star at the system's center. Even as the firing continued, Matsuda inclined his head slightly towards his tactical staff officer. So, TSO, what do we have? Looks like a screening force, sir. Some cruisers and destroyer-class ships. The tactical staff officer frowned. A lot of debris, sir. Hard to tell. But it looks like we aren't the first to arrive. But by the look of it, they were not expecting the enemy. At least 6 ships, no survivors. Matsuda nodded. In the inner system? The tactical staff officer took a moment to reply, checking his displays. Looks like a mess, sir. Hard to tell through all the jamming and debris in the system, but optical is picking up several capital-grade enemy ships and weapons fire. Someone is still fighting. Matsuda turned to a nearby communications officer. Call in the Ares and the Libra. Yes, Admiral. A few minutes after the signal was sent, the 2 other battlecruisers of Task Force 33 entered the system. Before moving to form up on the Aquarius and Taurus, the 4 immense battlecruisers forming a wedge formation. The task force's 2 remaining cruisers and 4 destroyers forming up behind. Very well, said Matsuda. You're the best crews in the Navy. Let's show them what we can do. Take us in at flank speed. With a leap of speed, the wedge of battlecruisers surged ahead, diving in towards the distant debris-filled maelstrom. As the minutes passed, and they closed with the inner system orbitals, the scale of the destruction took Janet Combs' breath away. Broken wreckage seemed to spiral in dazzling patterns. Here and there, the more solid shapes of wrecked ships and orbital platforms drifted aimlessly. The wedge-shaped formation was surging ahead, relying on shields and armor to deal with any debris. As they advanced, occasional coordinated volleys lashed out at any disabled Deimos ships that showed any signs of life, shattering their already damaged hulls. Sir, I have 9 enemy capital-grade ships in proximity of the main fleet and repair facilities. 2 appear to be adrift. The remaining 7 are pounding the orbitals from close range. Formation appears scattered, ships moving only in loose coordination. Matsuda did not immediately answer and took a moment to review the raw data. Tactical, I want a flying pass. Focus all fire on the nearest 2 ships. We need to even the odds, then bring us around and hit the 2 at the opposite end. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Left hook, right hook. As Task Force 33 tore into the inner system, the immense battlecruisers moved more like nimble fighters, the formation ducking and weaving through the debris field. Janet, having already prepared her emergency escape vectors, watched in awe as a torrent of fire was unleashed at the distracted Deimos fleet. Past the Deimos ships, Janet's awe turned to shock. She saw a line of ruined hulks shrouded in debris, from which was improbably still issuing answering fire to the much more numerous Deimos broadsides. The ships were so battered that she could not even visually determine what class of ship they were. But glancing at her display, she saw a weak UEF identification beacon. My God, it's the Gemini. Matsuda looked over at Janet, seeing the shock on her face. Matsuda was also shaken, but he hid it well under a fierce focus on the mission and a carefully crafted impassive mask. Even at the Battle of Maidenport, he had never seen such brutal close-range fighting. The ships of both sides were shattered, and beyond the system's expansive facilities were in shambles. The impact of Task Force 33 was like a hammer striking glass. The already battered Deimos formation struggled to respond fast enough or in a coordinated manner, and began to come apart. Leaving 2 Deimos battleships spiraling out of control, Task Force 33 did a high-speed turn, and its second pass saw 2 further Deimos ships adrift. Matsuda could feel the battle pivoting on a knife's edge, his warrior's instinct tingling. Tactical, bring us about, target the enemy's center. This time, heavy enemy fire lanced out, the battlecruiser's energy shields flaring, but Matsuda could smell blood, and as they closed, he ordered his cruisers and destroyers to unleash their torpedo loads at the center Deimos battleship. Already damaged, and with many of its munitions depleted, the Deimos ship found itself swarmed by dozens of heavyweight orbital torpedoes, the HOTS slamming home and punching deep into the enemy battleship. Matsuda, examining a report of heavy damage to the Libra, was about to order his next maneuver when the main bridge displays suddenly went white, several crew crying out and tearing off their 3DSi headsets. Matsuda's normally impassive face broke into a scowl. The system then flickered before coming back on. To Matsuda, it appeared like a miniature sun had appeared at the center of the Deimos formation. Traveling outwards from the immense explosion, chunks of ship the size of destroyers careened outwards at high velocity, smashing into the closest Deimos vessels. Janet Combs was the first to react, her hands flying across her display. Evasive maneuvers. All ships, evasive maneuvers. High-speed debris, plotting vectors now. A moment later, the bridge exploded into action as Task Force 33 struggled to avoid the mass of debris and executed emergency collision procedures.